The email hit my inbox at 8:43 a.m., subject line, alignment of communication channels. I knew it was going to be bad before I even clicked. Brent doesn't write emails. Brent gives marching orders. 3 months in, and he already smelled like cologne samples and middle management rot. I opened it anyway. One line, all external communications should now be routed through HR, effective immediately. No greeting, no signature, just the scent of war waged in Ariel 11. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds, heart weirdly calm, like when the power goes out and everything is too quiet, too fast. This was it, the final little shove off the platform. I'd been with the company 12 years, built the client success division from a broom closet and an empty CRM. And now, I was being told to pipe every client word through Brenda from HR, once asked if net terms meant social media language. I didn't reply with rage, didn't forward it to legal, didn't start a Slack whisper campaign. I just typed understood, hit send, and leaned back in my chair. Because what Brent didn't understand, and what no one else remembered, was that I wrote the original client onboarding framework. I knew where the bones were buried, and now he'd handed me the shovel. I'd note before I go any further, if you're liking this story, or you've ever wanted to throw your boss out a window and into a compliance meeting, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and like this. 95% of folks listening never subscribe, and it means the world to our little revenge-fueled operation. All right, back to the mess. The first sign that Brent was gunning for my head came 2 months before the email. It started with calendar invites. Mine stopped arriving, not just from his team, but from sales, then product, then even the damn facility's weekly check-in. I'd ping people, hey, am I missing a thread? They'd reply, oh, Brent said you were stepping back to focus on team development. I hadn't said that. I hadn't agreed to it. But that's the brilliance of corporate erasure. It's rarely loud. Then came the meeting reshuffles. My one-on-ones with the CRO became group syncs with client ops. Updates were being filtered through a junior account manager Brent brought in from his old company. A guy who once asked me what a churn rate was during his onboarding. A guy who now called himself Client Experience Captain on Slack. I kept notes. I archived every email. I screen captured Slack threads and saved them in a folder labeled puzzle pieces. Because I wasn't going to fight this with noise. No, I was going to build a silent, procedural guillotine, 1 page at a time. By the time Brent sent the all comms through HR Now email, I already had a log of 12 separate instances where he misrepresented our department to upper leadership. He once told the CEO that our drop in Q2 renewals was because of legacy workflows. I had proof that it was because he delayed the client check-in cadence for a dashboard overhaul that didn't even launch. But none of that mattered as much as what I found in the archived files from 2018. It was a dusty little PDF labeled Client Success Retention Agreement Addendum, back when we renegotiated several client MSAs to include performance-based exit clauses. I had almost forgotten. Almost. But there it was, black and white. Client reserves the right to terminate without penalty if KPIs fall below benchmark thresholds for 2 consecutive quarters, with notice authorized by Director of Client Success at time of agreement. That was me, my title, my clause, my out. And now, ironically, the very email Brent sent, stripping me of voice, made me invisible in just the right way, because I hadn't been formally removed. No paperwork, no demotion filed with legal. On paper, I was still the authorizing officer. And that was when the idea began to form, quietly, like smoke curling under a locked door. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about accuracy, accountability, procedure. And if they wanted everything to go through HR, well, I'd give them exactly that. The first time it happened, I figured it was just a glitch. Outlook drops people from meetings all the time, right? By the 4th week in a row of being accidentally left off the Monday pipeline review, my pipeline, mind you, I stopped chalking it up to IT goblins and started calling it what it was, erasure. Not the loud kind like a firing or a company-wide announcement. No, this was the slow, strategic kind. The kind that scrubs you out of the picture frame while you're still breathing. Brent played it smooth. He didn't revoke anything officially. He didn't fire my team, just started adding new roles. Client liaisons, engagement analysts, success strategists. Same job, different names, different people. He'd show up to exec meetings with a rotating cast of these title soup minions and describe it as streamlining redundancies. That's code for Michelle's legacy is in my way. Meanwhile, my calendar became a tomb. Recurring syncs vanished. One-on-ones with key clients were rescheduled without me. Only knew they happened because I'd get a courtesy thanks for the great meeting email afterward, sent to Brent and CC'd to a junior rep who hadn't even finished their onboarding checklist. Then the calls started. First it was Kayla, the CSM assigned to Apex Systems, our biggest healthcare software client. She pinged me at 6:12 p.m. on a Thursday. "Hey, did you mean for HR to return their inquiry about license expansion?" They seemed confused. Called HR. Brenda, the same Brenda who once asked if VPN was a kind of vitamin, said, "Oh, Brent told us to take point on anything client-side for the time being. Something about relieving you of external pressure while you reassess internal workflows." Reassess? I checked Slack. My team was chatting about their upcoming presentations for Q4 client strategy. No one mentioned me. One even said, "Brent wants us to align with the new North Star." What North Star? Was there a memo? Not for me, not anymore. It stung more than I expected, not because I was left out, but because no one questioned it. The silence from my own crew, even the ones I mentored from their first login, hit like wet concrete. And the worst part, Brent's language was always just vague enough to avoid legal consequence. Efficiency, recalibration, strategic realignment. Empty suits filled with buzzwords and arrogance. 2 more clients reached out in confusion the next week. One of them, the CMO of a fintech firm we'd saved from churn with a midnight dashboard fix last year, said bluntly, "Did you leave the company? HR told us you were no longer point of contact." That was the moment the ache in my gut turned solid, like something calcified. I wasn't just being phased out, I was being rewritten. But Brent made one mistake. He didn't kill my access, so I watched. I saved. Every email forwarded from a client to HR, I flagged. Every internal thread where Brent redefined my job function without formal approval, I archived. Every Slack thread where his new hires confused a renewal schedule with a refund protocol, screenshot. Saved to a folder on my personal drive labeled Continuity. Because one day soon, someone was going to ask what happened, and I wanted to be able to show them. All of it. Started walking around the office like a ghost that knew where all the floorboards creaked. My badge still worked. My signature still carried weight. My job title was still listed on the org chart, even if Brent was hoping no one would notice. But someone was going to notice. Because underneath the corporate white noise, a number had started blinking in my head, 85%. That was the client retention threshold in the investor term sheet. I could feel us slipping below it, one redirected email at a time. It was a Tuesday, one of those dead-air corporate days where the printer sounds louder than the people. Brent had taken his engagement alignment squad to an off-site at some overpriced coworking jungle with beanbags and cold brew on tap. I stayed behind, partly because I wasn't invited, mostly because I had work to do, real work, not the kind that fits on a vision board next to a motivational quote about synergy. I was cleaning out the shared drive, prepping for a handoff I hadn't agreed to, when I stumbled on a folder I hadn't touched since 2018. Back when we were still a startup with roaches in the server closet and investors who showed up to meetings in gym clothes. The folder was called Custom MSA Variants Tier 1. I almost skipped it. Almost. Inside were dozens of PDFs. Scans, some with my handwriting still visible from contract edits done during client dinners and weekend calls. One caught my eye, Apex Systems Contract Addendum Final MJ-SIG PDF. My initials, my digital signature. I clicked page 3. Section 4.2. I read it once. Then again. Then I laughed, a low, humorless thing that sounded like it belonged in a confession booth or a padded room. The event that KPIs defined in schedule befall below the agreed-upon threshold for 2 consecutive quarters. Client reserves the right to terminate services without penalty upon written notice. Notice may be provided by or through the Director of Client Success as designated at time of agreement. I was the signatory. My title was in the metadata. My name was in the log. There it was. 27 Tier 1 clients had versions of this clause. I wrote them. I negotiated them. I was the designated officer, and that hadn't changed. Not on paper, not in any legally binding sense. No revocation, no amendment, no audit trail of transition. They wanted me silent. They wanted me sidelined. But they forgot who wrote the damn manual. I sat back in my chair, staring at the clause like it was an old friend who just handed me a loaded weapon. Not because I wanted to use it, because it reminded me I wasn't powerless. They hadn't buried me. They just shut the door and assumed I'd starve in the dark. And then, I don't know what made me do it, but I pulled up the investor term sheet. I hadn't looked at it in over a year, had to dig through archived emails to find the attachment. The deal we signed last March was massive, Series D, tens of millions, tied to client retention and strategic leadership continuity. At the time, I skimmed it like everyone else, just happy to hit targets and not miss any landmines. But now, reading it with Brent's smug little ghost floating behind every word, I saw it differently. Page 9. Section 7C, there it was. In the event that retained client count among Tier 1 strategic accounts falls below 85% for 2 or more consecutive reporting periods, each investor reserves the right to suspend disbursement of remaining funds and initiate audit procedures. And right underneath that, material changes to designated strategic leadership roles must be disclosed and approved in writing prior to execution. Failure to notify constitutes breach of compliance obligations. I stared at it so long my eyes blurred. 2 clauses, one buried in client contracts, the other buried in the term sheet, both written when people still remembered my name without needing to check Slack. Both pointed like sharpened arrows directly at Brent's throat. He hadn't just dismantled my team, he had dismantled our funding structure without realizing it. He thought I was a paperweight, a relic, but I was the keystone, the compliance anchor, the person whose presence and authority validated every single Tier 1 agreement. And if I walked, if I was forced out, muffled, erased, those contracts went with me, not out of vengeance, out of design. I didn't need to invent a trap. I just had to pull the lever on one I built years ago. And suddenly, the quiet dread that had been rotting my stomach crystallized into something colder, sharper. I didn't just have leverage, I was leverage. And they'd given me every reason, every documented excuse to use it. The first email I sent was to Apex Systems. I wrote it Sunday night, saved it in drafts, and stared at it until the clock ticked past midnight. Not because I hesitated, but because I wanted the timestamp to be clean, legally crisp. Monday morning, 12:01 a.m., the beginning of a business week. Subject line, Notice of Service Termination per Section 4.2. I kept it bone dry. No emotion, no flourish, just compliance. I cited the contract clause verbatim, referenced the 2 consecutive quarters of underperformance clearly documented in the attached KPI report, and closed it with, "We appreciate the partnership to date and wish you continued success." Then I signed it. Michelle J. Stone, Director of Client Success, company name, and this part was important, I CC'd HR. Not Brent, not legal, not the C-suite. Just Brenda and the HR alias inbox. Because that's what I was instructed to do. Hit send. Then I took a sip of coffee and queued up the next one. 27 clients in total, each with a version of the MSA addendum I had crafted, each showing qualifying performance dips that met the exit criteria. I knew the contracts better than anyone because I'd tailored most of them myself, back when our churn rate threatened investor confidence, and we had to bake flexibility into the deals just to keep the lights on, and never learned that part of our history. He thought retention strategy meant tossing in a Starbucks gift card and calling it loyalty. He didn't know that some of our most high-value accounts chose us specifically because I'd given them respectful off-ramps. Exit plans weren't failures, they were features. And now, I was activating those features. One by one. Each email spaced a few hours apart. Enough to fly under any rogue employee mass action radar. Each sent from my official email with my official title and logged through our CRM with full audit trails. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could flag as sabotage, just compliance. By Wednesday, I had sent 10. By Friday, 17. The responses were mostly cordial, a few surprised, some grateful. One client replied, "Sad to go, Michelle, but this clause was one of the reasons we signed. Thank you for honoring it." Even asked if I was available to consult once things stabilized. Every response I got back, I forwarded to HR. I didn't say a word to Brent, and HR, they were dear in a conference room. Brenda replied once with, "Thanks, Michelle. We're reviewing internally," which was HR speak for "we're hoping this is a glitch that disappears before we have to get involved." They assumed I'd made a mistake, a copy-paste error. Maybe I'd misunderstood the clauses or cracked under pressure. But by the time legal finally caught wind, likely from Brenda panicking on Teams, I was already at 21. I imagined the scene, HR forwarding my messages up the food chain, legal furrowing their brows, trying to figure out how I was sending termination notices without a single flagged violation. Nothing to escalate, no breach. Just properly invoked contract terms, signed by someone whose officer title hadn't been revoked because they never filed the paperwork. No change of title, no memo, not even a formal performance review. In the system, I still had full authorization over every client decision I'd been granted when I first wrote those addenda. They could have stripped it, they just didn't. And now, Brent's house of glass was starting to rattle. But not a single shard had dropped yet. That would come later. For now, I kept my pace steady and emailed 22 on Sunday morning while watering my plants. Sent 23 that night during succession reruns, laughing to myself every time a character said optics. Sent 24 and 25 Monday morning before most of the office even opened their laptops. The 6th floor stayed quiet. No emergency meetings. No Slack explosions. Just a lot of hallway whispers and a noticeable absence of eye contact when I passed Brent's crew in the break room. I wasn't angry. Anger is noisy, sloppy. It leaves fingerprints. No, I was precise. And with every per section 4.2 I typed, the silence got heavier. Because somewhere, someone in legal was finally asking the right question. Wait, who still has signing authority? By Tuesday morning, the dam cracked. Brent stormed into HR like a mall cop chasing a felony. Witnesses later told me he was already red in the face before the elevator even hit the 6th floor. His opening line, "What the hell is going on with these terminations?" loud enough for the receptionist to flinch and Brenda to fumble her mouse across 2 screens. Apparently, he thought it was 1 or 2 emails. A mistake. A misfire. Then Brenda showed him the folder she'd labeled Michelle Terminations Week of 14th. 27 neatly filed PDFs, all with time-stamped CRM entries. All citing the same clause. All bearing my full signature. All, of course, CC'd to HR. Brent's next words were reportedly, "Who approved this?" Brenda, bless her unqualified heart, said, "Well, Michelle did. She had officer-level authority on those accounts at the time." The "at the time" part stung him. You could hear it 3 cubicles over. His voice dropped to that fake calm tone men like Brent use when they're about to self-destruct. "She doesn't have that authority anymore." And Brenda, she blinked. "Do you have that in writing?" He didn't, because he never bothered. There was no revocation form, no update submitted to legal, no HR memo, not even an org chart refresh. As far as every internal system was concerned, I was still director of client success, exactly the person empowered to authorize those exits. And then came the real pain. Legal. By noon, a junior counsel had been pulled from a compliance review to dig through the old MSA files. By 2 p.m., they had a makeshift task force pulling every Tier 1 agreement Michelle had ever touched. I heard from a friend in finance that someone in legal actually said, wait, her email signature might still constitute legal consent. Yes, it might, because we had baked that into the workflows on purpose back in 2018 to streamline service pivots. We made sure that my signature, if tied to an account's original onboarding, was sufficient. It was efficient then. It was nuclear now. Brent tried to claw control back the only way middle managers know how, with meetings. He scheduled one called Client Continuity Fire Drill for 3 p.m. Didn't invite me. Instead, he sat with HR, legal, the crow, 3 deer in headlights from his new client alignment pod. They laid out the situation, 27 client exits, triggered cleanly, no legal recourse, and most chilling of all, every one of those clients had the option to return later, just not under the current MSA terms. Terms Brent had tried to renegotiate for efficiency by gutting their service tiers. It wasn't just bad optics, it was breach territory. The CRO reportedly asked, so how did she get access to do this? And legal answered, because no one ever removed her. Silence. Then Brent again, well then revoke it, retroactively. Legal, we can't, that's not how that works. Outside that meeting room, I sat at my desk, typing up handover notes no one had asked for. I'd started forwarding files to myself, backups of backups, not to use, just to have. In case things got loud. In case Brent got desperate, because Brent was unraveling. Panic in a man like that makes him dangerous. I could feel the shift in the air, the way people stopped by my desk less. The way eyes glanced over shoulders, I knew that look. It's the look people give the person they think might be holding the trigger. I wasn't holding anything, not anymore. I'd already pulled it. The rest was gravity. By 4 p.m., someone from the investor's office had reached out to the CFO. Flagged anomaly in client retention trends, they said, and tried to spin it as a planned transition. HR, meanwhile, quietly started looking for their own lifeboats. And me, I ordered a smoothie and answered a LinkedIn message from an old colleague who said, Heard some chaos over there. What's going on? I just typed back, just tying up loose ends. The analyst spotted it first, one of those spreadsheet demigods over at the investor's office who probably speaks in pivot tables and conditional formatting. Buried in the weekly performance digest was a blinking red cell under Tier 1 client retention. 84.1%. Not a huge drop in isolation, but it might as well have been a klaxon siren when you've got $42 million hanging in escrow contingent on the company holding an 85% retention rate. The analyst flagged it. Their VP noticed the pattern. And less than 2 hours later, the lead investor, one who carried veto rights baked into the Series D term sheet, was calling the CFO's cell phone, which, conveniently, was sitting on the boardroom table during the client continuity crisis meeting. Material change in client status, the investor said. Translation: emergency board meeting. Now, CFO's face reportedly went white as printer paper. He left mid-sentence, clutching his laptop like it could protect him from lawsuits. Board was pulled together within the hour. Remote dials, emergency Uber rides. CEO rushed back from a podcast interview he'd scheduled to talk about next-gen client loyalty strategies. Ironic, really. Brent wasn't ready. He thought he still had time to massage the narrative, to loop in PR, to blame seasonal attrition or client segmentation updates. He did what all corporate rats do when the water gets high. He lied. Operational transitions, told the board, temporary dips due to shifting engagement protocols. He didn't know yet that the investors' team already had the termination emails. All 27 of them, all time-stamped, all signed by me, all CC'd to HR. They didn't call it sabotage, they called it compliance. And compliance was much, much worse for him, because compliance meant it was legal, expected, authorized. I wasn't invited to the meeting. Of course not. Brent probably crossed my name off the list with a Sharpie and some false confidence, as if exclusion equals safety, as if the person you sidelined for months didn't still have teeth. So while they gathered in that frosted glass fishbowl of panic, I sat at my desk with a hot tea, reviewing email 27 one last time, making sure every word aligned with the clause. It did, perfectly. Then I opened a new message to my personal legal contact. Subject line, documentation update. Body, one sentence. Investor may invoke Clause 7C imminently. Please prepare summary of contract compliance trail. That was it. No drama, no declaration of war, just a procedural nudge to someone who understood the weight behind those words. Clause 7C, buried in the term sheet. The sword hanging over every executive's head. If client count dropped, or if key leadership roles were altered without disclosure, investor could suspend funding and initiate a full internal audit. And guess what no one ever disclosed? My removal, because technically there wasn't one. They'd silenced me, rerouted me, erased me from calendars and conversations, but they never filed the change. Legally, I was still the designated point of contact for those clients, the same clients whose departures triggered the clause. It was like watching a building tilt in slow motion, listening to the groan of steel as it gave way, not from force, but from neglect. Inside the meeting, Brent spun harder, called the terminations unintentional miscommunications, said I overstepped, until legal pulled out the contracts, until HR confirmed the CCs, until the investor quietly asked, was her authority formally revoked? The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was doom. They had stepped on the landmine. All I did was let it detonate. Air in the boardroom had gone so still, people later swore they could hear the hum of the HVAC system kicking in overhead. The investor wasn't yelling. That would have been easier. No, he was calm, clinical, like a surgeon before the first incision. He adjusted his glasses, clicked his pen once, and asked the question that would peel the skin off the room. Who terminated these accounts? Silence. HR looked at legal. Legal looked at Brent. Brent looked down, like the question had just sprouted nails. Brenda from HR, who hadn't been in a boardroom since the holiday cookie drive, cleared her throat and offered, the notices were sent by Michelle Stone, from her company email. She CC'd HR on all of them. The investor didn't flinch. He didn't ask why. He just turned to the general counsel and asked the next question, low, calm, fatal. Was her authority revoked in writing? The pause was too long, long enough to feel like judgment. Long enough for everyone in the room to realize they hadn't just forgotten something, they'd violated something. General counsel hesitated, eyes darting like they were chasing an answer across the walls. I don't believe formal revocation paperwork was filed. Investor, So, by company records, she retained officer-level authority over the relevant accounts. Legal, technically, yes. Investor and the contracts she referenced in her termination notices, were those legitimate? Legal flipped through a binder like it might offer mercy. They matched the archived MSAs. Clause 4.2 in each case allows for performance-based termination. All metrics align. The notices comply. Investor leaned back, exhaled slowly, then said, so she acted within her role, exercised existing authority, and followed documented procedure. No one answered, because no one could. That was the moment Michelle's absence in the room became louder than any defense Brent could offer, because she wasn't hiding. She was invited nowhere, and yet she had moved the mountain. She didn't send rebuttals, didn't request a meeting, didn't leak to press or hurl accusations. She just executed protocol. Clean, surgical. And now that silence, the very one Brent tried to bury her with, had twisted back around his neck. Board member finally spoke. Why didn't we revoke her access? Brent, pale and sweating, answered, we were planning to restructure. We assumed investor cut him off. You assumed? You left millions in client revenue tethered to an assumption? No answer. He closed the binder gently, not slamming it, not throwing a tantrum. Just the soft thump of inevitability. I want an audit, he said, of internal communication logs, HR records, structural compliance decisions from the last 9 months. Brent tried one last lunge. She blindsided us. The investor gave him a look so dry it could have turned wine back into water. She followed orders. She CC'd HR. She abided by every instruction your team gave. If you were blindsided, it's because you closed your eyes. Outside that room, I sat in my quiet corner office, the one they'd forgotten to reassign. I watched the little green dot on Brent's Slack go from active to offline. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just stared at the wall and let the silence fill the room, because silence had always been the weapon. And now, finally, they heard it scream. It was the sound of paper against wood that broke the boardroom's paralysis. A soft, deliberate slide, like a dealer pushing a losing hand across a blackjack table. The investor reached into his leather folio, pulled out a crisp printed copy of the term sheet, the original, notarized, final version, and placed it flat in front of him. No theatrics, just gravity. Then, with 2 fingers, he slid it across the polished oak table, straight toward the company lawyer. The motion was so restrained, so quiet, that felt like a whisper with weight. The lawyer didn't move at first, just stared at the document like it had teeth. When he finally picked it up, his eyes locked immediately on the section already flagged with a fluorescent tab, Clause 7C. As he read, the blood drained from his face like someone pulled the plug. Then came the words, not loud, not dramatic, just real. Oh no, that's all it took. Because Clause 7C wasn't vague. It wasn't one of those subject to interpretation throwaway lines companies bury in legal jargon. It was surgical. The event that A. The company loses more than 15% of Tier 1 clients in any 2 consecutive quarters. Or B. Alters, removes, or otherwise modifies any strategic leadership position listed in Schedule A without prior written consent of lead investor. The investor reserves the right to immediately suspend disbursement of funds, initiate a governance review, and trigger a formal investigation into breach of fiduciary obligations. There was no wiggle room, and the bomb had already gone off. 27 clients gone. Strategic leadership me silently removed without paperwork, without investor notification. The lawyer looked up, mouth barely moving. You didn't tell them? Brent opened his mouth. Nothing came out, just breathe, like his words had packed their bags and skipped town. Another board member leaned forward. You didn't notify the investor you were reorganizing client success. Brent, it wasn't a reorg. It was just internal streamlining, investor cut in. Don't lie. Brent shut up so fast it was like his jaw locked. The investor turned to the CEO, who had been quiet until now. Did you approve this? The CEO looked like a man who just realized the ship he was captaining had been torpedoed from the inside. I wasn't aware the removals hadn't been formalized. Investor nodded slowly, as if tallying sins. No one filed revocation paperwork. No one disclosed a structural change. No one flagged that 27 strategic clients were offboarded, legal interrupted, and that each offboarding was lawful, executed by a designated officer, and matched to performance metrics. Investor, which makes them enforceable. The room sagged under the weight of it. One of the outside directors leaned back, muttering, Jesus Christ. Brent tried again. It was a miscommunication. Investor's head turned like a scope zeroing in. You removed the compliance anchor from your client's structure without understanding who she was, what she had access to, or what clauses she helped draft. And then you kept her name on the documents. That's not miscommunication, that's incompetence. Brent blinked hard. His tie was suddenly too tight. His voice went brittle. She went rogue. This was sabotage. The investor's laugh was dry and short. She didn't go rogue. She went silent. That's not the same thing. Brent looked around the room for support. None came. Legal wouldn't meet his eyes. HR looked like they wanted to disappear into their ergonomic chairs. The CEO was already checking something on his phone, probably the early signs of stockholder blowback. And the board, they looked at Brent like he had a contagious disease. Not anger, not shock, just containment. He was now a liability, a vector for loss, something to be quarantined and carved out before the whole organism got infected. Outside that room, I was still in my office, still not called, still not named. But I knew the sound of a slide across the table when I heard it through a wall of silence. And I knew what followed next, because that clause, it wasn't just the trap, it was the door. The room felt colder now. Maybe it was the air conditioning finally catching up. Maybe it was just the realization sinking into every suit in that boardroom that the floor had dropped out beneath them, and it wasn't coming back. The investor stood slowly, not angry, not loud, just decisive, like someone signing a death certificate that had been sitting on the desk too long. "I'm suspending the term sheet," he said. 14 words, that's all. Every executive in the room froze, because those words didn't just mean a hold on cash. They meant trigger clauses, pullbacks, legal exposure. A full audit from the investor's compliance team. For a company like ours, lean, leveraged, and entirely addicted to Series D runway, that was an artery being cut. The CEO muttered something under his breath. The general counsel shut his laptop like it had insulted him. One board member picked up their phone, dialed something, and then stopped, because who the hell were they going to call to fix this? Investor turned to the room like he was ordering lunch. "Get Michelle." Brent looked like he was going to object, but his lips moved without sound, like a fish dying on the dock. No one moved for a full 5 seconds. Then Brenda, deer in headlights Brenda, pushed her chair back and left the room. I was waiting, not out of vanity, but because I knew. When people make a mess with paperwork, it's always the quiet one they call to clean it up. Brenda appeared at my door, eyes wide. They need you in the boardroom. I stood, smoothed my blouse, closed my laptop, and walked the same hallway I had walked every day for 12 years. Past the framed fake awards, the mission statements, the motivational quote in the lobby about collaborative disruption. Into the lion's den. The door opened. The room was silent. I walked in, didn't look at Brent, didn't look at the CEO, didn't even glance at the blinking Zoom squares on the big screen. Sat at the empty chair at the far end of the table. Not the head, not the side, just anchored. The investor looked at me directly. I didn't wait. "You told me to CC HR, I said, calm, even I complied. The board lawyer rubbed his temples like he had a migraine birthed in hell. "She's not at fault," he muttered. "She followed policy. He looked at Brent, you handed her the match and poured the kerosene." Brent tried to stand. "This is a manipulation." Investor didn't even raise his hand. Just said, "Sit down." Brent sat. The investor looked at me again. And this time his voice had something else behind it. Not warmth, but recognition. The kind you give a weapon that just fired clean through a locked vault. "Michelle," he said, "would you be willing to return as interim COO?" I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just nodded once, steady. And then I turned to legal. First step, reinstate the client success team. All original structures. All roles effective immediately. I stood up, paused, looked around the room of stunned men and scattered pride, and said, just loud enough to fill the silence. And this time, I let it hang. All comms go through me. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.